Hello and welcome everyone to the long-awaited guide on how to fly the working title CJ4. First things first, check the description. I'm going to have timestamps of everything that I'm talking about here. That way you can come back to it and click on it. Because I'm pretty much just going to wing it here, because it was going to take a long time for me to build up like a storyboard and what I was going to do, this and that, to make it a lot more structured. But everyone's already waited long enough, so we're just going to start, and I'm just going to go through everything, do a little flight, and kind of see how it works. I flew the CJ4 for about 2 years, had about 400 hours in it, got my type rating. Awesome jet to fly. It's actually, I think it's one of my favorite airplanes to fly. Lots of cool features, awesome avionics, just ridiculous climb performance. It's a blast to fly, and I miss flying it. Alright, so first things first, we'll go ahead and talk about the tilt panel here. This is what this is called. It's kind of tilted towards your face. So all the way on the left is your oxygen supply. It doesn't work right now, but normally when we were finished with the flight, we'd pull that out to stop any flow of oxygen from leaving the tanks, because sometimes if there was a leak in your line, let's say you did an overnight trip and you got to the airplane the next morning and then all of a sudden your oxygen's completely depleted, you can't take off because it's required to have a certain level in there. So you would always, at the beginning of the flight, you'd push that in, you hear a little noise, because the oxygen's flowing into the mask, which the oxygen mask would be right here behind your seat. It's one of the quick donning versions, but obviously not there on the model. I don't think we can add it because we can't mess with the model. But hydraulic shutoff valves, you would never really press these unless you have some sort of issue. They're not even working right now. The oxygen mask mic, that's one thing you would do if you had to put the oxygen mask on. You'd have to press this button, otherwise the microphone is not going to pick it up because there's one inside the mask itself. The oxygen control, again, you'd never touch this unless there was a pressurization issue. It's automatic. I think the masks drop at 14,800 feet, I believe, in normal mode, and then 10,000 feet in normal mode, and maybe 14,800 if you're in high elevation mode. But this gives you the option, if it doesn't drop automatically, you can set it here or allow the crew-only oxygen flow. Fuel boost manual. I don't think you would ever use this. In very certain situations you would do it, but this very automatic airplane, so you're really not going to do this much at all. Fuel transfer, so this is a transfer system. You can't actually cross-feed on this airplane. So the difference is, with cross-feeding, you can have both engines feeding from one tank, but in this case, you can't do that. You can only transfer fuel from one tank to the next. You can each engine can only consume fuel from its own tank on its respective side. So it's a really slow transfer pump. Actually, I'm not even sure if it's working right now in the game, but it's something I'd like to address in the future. It's also going to throw on the fuel boost pump and all that, but we'll take care of that. Pilot fan. Actually, the climate control system in this airplane is awesome. Never had any complaints with it. The packs were always comfortable, and they could change it. There's a VIP seat in the airplane, which is seat number 5, which is this seat right here. He has the master control on the side where you can control all the lights and the temperature in the back and all that. So if you look at this knob here, see how it says cabin temp? If this were to go all the way to the bottom to remote, that gives the VIP seat the option to control everything back there. So we would always leave this remote. We never touch this at all, because there's no reason for them to constantly coming up to you, tapping on the shoulder, hey, it's too cold in here, hey, it's too hot. So you leave it on remote, they can do it themselves. So the climate control system in here, it's actually a vapor cycle machine, and there's actually a couple things involved. There's a couple vortex tubes that they use. Really crazy system where it's really hard to explain. I'll bring up a picture of it, but apparently it takes in bleed air in one end. I don't know the temperatures, and then it spits out a hot temperature and then also a really, really cold temperature, and it can blend those together to give you some climate control. And like the air inside this tube spins at 1,000,000 RPM. It's ridiculous. But there's also vapor cycle machines, and there's 3 condensers located in the airplane. One of them for the cockpit is actually right behind the FO's seat. It's actually, if you were to open this door right here, Actually, this isn't quite right, but there's a little panel you can open up, and it's sitting right here. And then there's 2 more condensers back for the back of the cabin here. So once you have power to the airplane, you could actually just turn the battery on. If you were to turn the climate control on, it's going to turn on the big fan, which actually is the outlet to the fan is it's not mod. It's right here. Here we go. So when you turn this on the ground, this really loud fan for the evaporator is going to blow out of that exit right there. But really nice system, and so it's not needed for the engines to be running. It doesn't use any bleed air or anything like that. And the compressor on, if you're on the ground and it's not turning the compressor on, you can click it like that and it will stay on all the time, but it will turn off. I believe it's above 28,000 feet, somewhere around there, because it's already cold enough outside that you don't need that to be on. So even if you had that on, it would turn it off, and there should be a little blue light right here to indicate that the compressor is on. However, this stays off until you have both engines running. And again, the cockpit amp, we rarely even mess with this. It's always left in the middle, and everything was always good to go. FADEC Reset, never use this. This is to be, actually, no, we did use this one time. Sometimes you get an error with FADEC. If you're flying through some clouds sometimes in certain situations and you don't have the engine anti-ice on, the pressure and temperature probe that sits in the front of the fan can ice over it, and FADEC does not like that because it's not getting correct data, and sometimes it'll throw a FADEC fault, and on the ground you might have to reset it. But otherwise you would never touch these right here. Ignition manual, same deal as well. Never touch it. FADEC pretty much does every single thing you can think of for the jet engine. You just literally just press this button and you press it again to turn it off, and FADEC does every single thing else. So I can't even think of the situation where you would use this. But yeah, you would never really touch it. Pressurization is also completely automatic. Everything is done through the FMS. So once you put in your departure airport and your arrival airport, it knows the elevation for both of them. When you put in your cruise altitude, it's going to know that. So then it creates a pressure profile that is done completely automatic, and there's really nothing you can do. So, and actually, because these screens, they're kind of duplicated, we haven't separated them yet due to performance issues. We're looking into it. That way, you don't drop 15 frames just because we duplicated the screens. But normally on this MFD here, you'd have the pressurization readout. Actually, I can just bring up a picture of that from when I've visited the airplane. But this, that's how you tell, like, the cabin, the current cabin altitude, the rate, all that, the destination elevation. So there's really nothing you can do to this but just observe the FMS at work. Cabin pressure dump, would never use this unless there was like an overpressure situation or you had smoke you had to clear out of the cockpit. And the outflow valves are located on the back behind here. It's actually the baggage compartment that's behind the lavatory here, but that's the end of the pressure bulkhead. There's 2 outflow valves there, and it actually uses like a little inflatable balloon to regulate the opening of the valve back there. But so the airflow kind of would go aft, and yeah, so you would never really use that. Kind of why it's guarded as well. You don't want to be pressing that. And if you do press the dump button, it doesn't just immediately dump all the pressure. It actually does it. I can't remember the rate that it does it, but it's not instant. It's slower than you think, and it also levels out at 14,800 or something like that. It's the highest that the cabin altitude could ever be. There's a lot of checks involved with that. The pressurization control standby. If you have some sort of electrical issue with the pressurization controller, because I believe it's electrically activated and mechanically controlled. But if you had some sort of electrical issue, you could go to the standby controller, which I believe is all mechanical. I'd have to double check that though, but again, you'd never press that unless you'd have some sort of mechanical issue or some sort of issue, period. The pressurization source, this always stays in the normal mode. You would never change that ever, and you don't need to turn it off. This basically selects which bleed air source you would get from the engines. So again, you would only use this if you have some sort of issue. Like if there was a bleed problem let's say you had a bleed leak off the right engine, you would probably turn this to the left. And of course, if you turn it off, you would lose pressurization in the airplane. And then fresh air, you would use that if you're trying to pretty much clear smoke out of the cabin. And the fresh, it shuts off the pressures or closes the bleed valves of both the engines. And there's actually a ram. Let's see if it shows it. Oh yeah, right there. So there's a ram air inlet, which is right here on this pylon, that pulls in fresh air into the cabin and allows you to clear smoke. Let's see, we got the park and brake, the control lock. I don't think we use that very often. The emergency brake here is actually a pneumatic system that you only have so many pulls on that lever until you are out of braking, because it just pushes air against the hydraulic fluid. And so when you're using this lever in a real emergency, you would use it just a little bit and a little bit. You don't want to slam the thing in there because your brakes are going to lock up and everything. Moving along, this panel here is called the CCP, or Cursor Control Panel. This pretty much, you can see this button here called Cursor, and it actually is an op in the CJ4. It doesn't really belong. I guess I should say that the Proline 21 is in various different aircraft, and the cursor function just isn't a thing on the CJ4. So the button is actually there, but it doesn't do anything. But the CCP here is how you're able to basically manipulate the MFD. Actually, I'll go into that later as we start up the airplane, to all the different functions and things like that, and show you some pictures of the real thing. The ice protection. So the ice protection system, the wing and I think it's the wing. Yeah, the wing and the pedostatics are limited to 2 minutes of operation on the ground, because if you kept them on for too long, the probes and the wing would actually burn out and warp. They actually showed us a picture in training of a pilot who left these on too long, and the entire leading edge of the wing was completely warped, and it was apparently $400,000 of damage. So you don't want to be that guy. So basically it's procedure to, you're sitting there at the end of the runway. As soon as you get cleared for takeoff, you would go ahead and turn the pedostatics on, and the wing and engine anti-ice if you needed to, or taking off in icing conditions. And then once you land, as soon as you exit the runway, you go ahead and turn those off because you don't want those to burn up. The crossflow is a function to, let's say you had an engine failure. The crossflow allows you to port bleed air from the working engine into the other wing to allow for anti-ice. It's one of the memory items for with an engine failure on takeoff. You would do the rest of the procedure and then turn the crossflow on. It's often missed because it's really not significant unless you're flying in icing conditions, but it's definitely required. And the the wing light for checking for the icing on the wings, I can't go any further, is actually, there's only one of them. It's only on the captain's side, as you can see it right here. This is a single pilot jet, so there's really, if you got icing on this wing, you're probably going to have it on the right wing. As you can see, there's no icing light here, so some people are asking about that. Let's see. Alright, we've got the Copilot mic. I think this is another push to talk. If your button on the back of the yoke, which I got rid of, but if that wasn't working, you could press this button to talk on the radio. The TAWS, so this is a terrain awareness and warning system. So if you had a an issue with the glide slope or something like that, or I think if you're doing like a localizer and the glide slope is inoperative, sometimes it could throw off an erroneous warnings. Would be really annoying, like constant glide slope. You could cancel that alarm with that. Cockpit speaker, this button is always on because it's annoying having the radio, you know, if you're a passenger in the jet. There's no door, by the way, on this thing. It's actually just a little curtain that's not modeled, but there's a curtain right here behind the FO's head, and you would slide it along this little rack here, and that's it. There's no door, no nothing. So everything you say up there, they could potentially hear, so you got to be careful. So the speakers are right here and here. So this button, since you're always pretty much wearing a headset in the jet, that would always stay on. And this button here is actually blue, and it's very annoying at night because it's very bright and it shines right in your face when you're sitting in the right seat. And I wish Cessna lowered the brightness of that thing because it's very annoying. Event marker, this is actually a maintenance function, but you could use it as a pilot. Let's say you were flying along and you had some issue with, I don't know, let's say the engine just lost power for a split second, or it backfired or something, or surged. You could press that button and then you tell the maintenance guy, hey, you know, our engine did something weird. And then you could say, oh, we did a marker for it, so he can go back into the files and find that marker real nice and easy and quick and figure out what's going on. This COM1 tune, if you ever had an electrical emergency where you've lost all power and you're down to the batteries, there's an option here. You can just click this button and it will automatically tune your #1 radio to 121.5. And I think it turns amber as well if you were to click that, but I can't remember. We talked about the controls here. Of course, you got the Copilot fan, the cabin. This is always a normal again, but if you've got this set to remote, actually, no, I think that is separate. You could turn up and down the fan for them as well, but they can do that on their own. The ELT button or switch, never really going to touch this unless you were testing it. And the hours meter, and of course the FO side mic right here. And also, I'm looking at it, this little panel right here is actually, if you were to open that up, you'd see 2 USB little plugins there, or ports. This is where you would update the database. We always had ours on little thumb drive sticks. You just put them in there. It takes about 30 minutes to update all the database options, database, graphical weather, things like that. Those are every, I don't remember, I think 28 days we do it, or 15. I think like the graphical weather and stuff were every 15 days. Let's go ahead and see anything interesting down here. Beacon goes on before engines start. The nav lights pretty much always stay on. Strobe lights, you would only use them pretty much just as you've been cleared for takeoff, and as you're on the runway and stuff like that, because it's very annoying and bright if you were to turn these on all the time for other pilots, things like that. And also, if you're flying through the clouds and you have the strobe light reflection, you could turn them off as well, because it can be disorienting when you're having this strobing effect in front of your eyeballs. The logo light just turns on the lights for the tail. I think they're actually on the bottom of the wing. Yeah, they're right. Whoops. You see the logo lights are right here and here, which light up the tail at night. Kind of the same logic. I would turn those off with the taxi lights, you know, on below 10,000, and turn them off above 10,000. And then, you know, as you park to your parking spot, you can just go ahead and turn those off. The pulse lights are actually, if you were to turn those on, it would pulse your landing lights, which are located right here. It would pulse those, you know, on. It would kind of cycle them back and forth. You pretty much wouldn't use those unless you're coming in for a landing. You wouldn't use them on the takeoff or anything like that. But if you had the TCAS function available, if you ever had a, I think it's an RA, it would go off, or possibly a TA. So a TA is a traffic advisory. So here, like traffic, and it would pop up here. It would be yellow, so there's traffic that you just kind of want to look out for. But if an RA is a resolution advisory, so that means there's a collision alert, and you're going to need to do something. So it'll pop up in the screen telling you to descend or climb or increase climb, things like that. So if you had this pulse light set to TCAS, it would flash those automatically when one of the situations were to come up. Let's see, we got the speed brake lever. So this goes all the way out, and there's actually a detent right here. So on landing, when you want to extend the ground spoilers, you would click that all the way out. And if you can see it, so there's 4 panels in each wing. So these 3 are the ground spoilers, and this actually is the speed brake, and there's one below it as well, as you can see. So in flight, actually, the most you could ever do is that. That's all the speed brakes you get, because ground spoilers are not authorized in flight. You could do that. You could put it like that, but they won't extend in flight. In fact, you'll even get a message saying ground spoilers. I can't remember what it says, but it basically tells you that it's not going to extend them because you're in the air and you're an idiot. But actually, if you, between outside the detent and going through the detent, it actually gives you a little bit extra angle on your speed brake, so you can get a little bit more drag out of it. But again, you're gonna get that message. So, and the speed brakes, they're fairly effective. I actually dialed them down a couple patches ago because they were insanely effective. But it's a fairly slippery jet. But I think what we have now is pretty realistic to the real thing. You shouldn't be in the nosedive 30 degrees down, losing airspeed with the speed brakes out. The throttles. So one of the things that's kind of annoying right now is you can't feel these detents in the throttles. So there's two of them really. There's one right here, and there's one right here. So when you bring the throttles all the way up, the first detent you're going to hit is the climb detent. So if you were to go all the way up right before that detent right there, you'd be at the max cruise position. And if you clicked it once more, you'd be in the climb detent. And then if you clicked it again, you'd be in the takeoff detent right here. So we're kind of thinking of an idea of how to simulate that, because this is all FADEC. You know, anything you do here, you're just giving a suggestion to FADEC, and then it's going to do whatever it needs to do. It's very easy to operate this jet. So during the climb and stuff like that, it's pretty much soon after takeoff, when you bring out the flaps, you're going to click it right back into the climb detent, which it's going to probably be, I don't know, between like 93 and 97% N1. It doesn't take off too much, but you are limited to 5 minutes in the takeoff position, and you could stay in the climb position for, there's no limit on that. You can stay in that forever. In fact, if you're in cruise and you just don't have enough power to kind of keep the airspeed where you want, you could just stay in the climb position for as long as you want. But normally you just click on the cruise position, and that's good to go. Again, there's no thrust reversers on this jet. Let's see, engine starter. Yeah, I think normally you have to, if the game kind of doesn't have it correct, you would start the engine with this, and then if you want to disengage it, you would have to click the disengage button. If you click this, it wouldn't really do anything. Let's see, secondary elevator trim. Wouldn't really worry about this unless you had a primary trim failure. Alright, the trims look good, so let's see, what else we got? The audio panel. So the game currently has this messed up. There should only be one light on at one time, because this basically controls which radio you can talk to. You can only talk to one frequency at a time. So we'll have to change that in the future. The electrical panel. So these gens always stay on. They will never be turned off unless you have an error. Because the engines use a starter generator, so it's an electrical start, or it's an electrical motor, and it'll start the engine up, and then as soon as the engine starts, you know, spooling up and making its own power, those starters will turn into generators. So they need to be on for engine start, and there's no reason to turn them off unless you have a problem. The battery in this airplane is very poor. It's a 44 amp hour. There's different versions. You can have a lithium-ion, lead-acid, or a NiCad battery, but it's really bad. I think it's you have 10 minutes. If you were to turn this on and the avionics on, you have 10 minutes before the battery dies. So that's one of the things too during an electrical emergency in flight. If you were to lose both generators, is you need to turn this to emergency within like 5 minutes to ensure that you have like 30 minutes of time left on the battery, because the battery just cannot support the avionics and all this stuff, because it's got to switch to the emergency bus to save electrical power. So very poor battery in this airplane, but guess it works. Emergency lights, those would be off and you would turn them on. We'll get the switch eventually. The standby flight display, normally that's not working, but normally you would at the beginning of the flight you would click into the test position, and there should be a little blue light right here that will turn blue to ensure that the battery is charged, and it's for this here, the standby flight display. And then you would go to the on position, and that's pretty much good to go. The avionics on, and the dispatch mode. So the dispatch mode, see, this should normally bring up the FMS1 right here. So the dispatch mode allows you to basically call clearance and get your clearance in without turning on the battery and wasting your battery, because this just only turns on this. It's not really working because the sim doesn't recognize anything unless the battery is turned on. So something we'll have to look at in the future once we kind of overhaul the electrical system, because right now it's really bad. Your battery is just constantly draining. But we'll work it out. Let's see what else we got. So we'll start up here. So this is the DCP panel, or the display control panel, which is this allows you to modify and kind of mess with the PFDs. And let's see, you know what, I think I might just start the jet. Yeah, let me just start it up, and that way I can go through the stuff and we'll check it out. So I'll meet you right back. On second thought, I think I should show you how to start the thing and how you normally do it. It's fairly simple, but go ahead and go to battery on. These messages shouldn't be here, nor should this TAWS test thing, or honestly anything here should be here. Whoops. So yeah, pretty much when we pulled the airplane out of the hangar, we never started it with anything as far as any start card or GPU. We would just do the starts right with the battery, so it wasn't really a problem. And the real jet is limited to I think it's 9 knot, a 9 knot tailwind, because it originally was 19, I believe, for engine start. But there was one CJ4 that had a hot start and it burned the whole engine and the tail and all that, because it got out of control. And then Cessna basically, I think, said, all right, well, instead of 19 knots, changes to 9 or 10 knots. I can't remember what it is, but because, you know, it's an issue on this jet because the engine's so small that, you know, there's not much airflow going through it. So when you have 10 knots of wind at the tail, you know, the compressor's trying to force the air out the back, but it's getting pushed in as well. So there's definitely a limitation. It's something you should definitely think about if you want to be realistic. In the sim, it's not going to matter, but it's just how it's done in real life. All right, so once this is on, pretty much the first thing you do is you want to get the engine started, because these batteries suck. So everything looks good. Turn that to normal. So you're going to press the starter. It's going to engage the starter. It's going to spool the N2, which is the gas generator, and right at about 11%, it's going to provide ignition. In fact, I'll just, so you can see the fuel flow. And actually, I've been modifying this a little bit. You shouldn't see this in this version right now, because we're kind of working on it, but at 11%, it's going to start the ignition process, and this thing spools up very quick. The game does not do it justice right now. It's way too slow, but it's going to spool it up. And at 45% N2, the starter is going to cut off, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, you're going to press the start button, and then without delay, you're going to press the engine run start stop button, because FADEC does every single thing on this jet for you as far as the engines. So you don't need to wait for 20% or anything like that. Just click and go. So right around 11%, it should kick off. There we go, there's light off, and this should be spooling up much quicker. Alright, we're coming up on 45%. The starter should come off shortly. There we go. Now at this point, it should pretty much already be spooled up. It's just really slow on this thing. Alright, that one's good. And then, should turn that down. And then in real life too, again, we would start the second engine right after. So I'll just cut back once we're good to go. Alright, both engines are started. Also wanted to note too, this hydraulic pressure here should be around 3,000 psi, and that pressure should be at 3,000 at like 20% N2. So we need to adjust that, because this shouldn't vary at all with N1, or it's really not correct. So we'll be adjusting that. Alright, so Now that the engines are started, we go ahead and go to avionics on. Go ahead and turn that off. Alright, so now we'll talk about the PFD menu here, or the DCP, Display Control Panel. So in the PFD menu here, we have the rows format, which the Sobo does not have this correct. The rows and arc formats actually should not show the present position of the airplane. You shouldn't see any waypoints or anything like that. Let me turn this so it's... Okay, here we go. Yeah, it shouldn't be like that. There should actually be a course needle so you can see where you're going and if you're on course. So that's something we're going to add in the future. And you can tell, actually the way this is set up right now is called the present position. So the PPOS, present position format, which we cannot select right now, just haven't done it yet. But the present position format is a track up and it shows all the waypoints. And you can notice it's present position because it has this outline of the airplane. I'll show you a picture of what it's supposed to look like on the real thing. But the rows and arc formats have a stick figure airplane, which denotes that it's not present position. It just shows you your track, or I'm sorry, your course needle and things like that. So something we'll change in the future. Escape, obviously, we'll get rid of all the menus are on. The navigation, or yeah, that doesn't swap nav frequencies. That's not right. But what this does is change your navigation source. So right now, our navigation source is the FMS, and it's magenta, which means that the data is coming from the FMS, and that same system follows through the entire airplane. So if you noticed before, whenever you send your V-speeds in from the FMS, they turn magenta here. And things that are blue are things that were set by you. So if we put in magenta FMS speeds and we wanted to change them, if we did change them, they would turn blue because that indicates blue is you. So another example, the altimeter here, 2992, that cannot be set by the FMS. It's something that you would set. That's why it's blue. So that same system pretty much follows through with the rest of the Proline 21. It's pretty cool because it kind of gives you an idea and kind of standardizes things. But the navigation source, if you were to swap this, now we go to VOR1. VOR2, which actually this should be a yellow color because yellow would indicate that you're pulling data from a different source. So in this case, if you notice this little arrow, that is what the autopilot is coupled to. So it's coupled to the captain's side air data computer and FMS. So if you were to click this again, technically it should go to FMS2 and it would be yellow because FMS2 is the first officer side. But that's for a little bit later on. But this is how you would swap between navigation sources. So if you're coming in for an ILS, you're flying the FMS, you're flying your flight plan, and you would like to switch to the localizer, you'd go ahead and click that. This should turn to ILS because if you had the appropriate frequency dialed in, it would show ILS, and then you could tell the autopilot, hey, I want to fly the localizer instead of the FMS. So that would be how you would do it. The ET is the lapse timer. So this brings up a little timer at the bottom left. So you could time anything you want, procedure turns or how long you've been aloft or something like that. Anything you want. Click it the second time, it's going to pause it. Click it the third time, we'll get rid of it. The format button is how you would cycle through these formats right here. There's a lot of features that you'll notice that are redundant. So a lot of things you'll see in these menus are elsewhere because they thought ahead in case there was a failure of certain panels, you'd be able to access the information from a different system. But in this case, this is kind of just like a real quick way you can cycle through. So here's the arc format and the rows. Well, it should have been the present position format, but terrain and weather. Of course, I don't think radar isn't really simulated well on this thing, and in my opinion, neither is the terrain. But this is where you would cycle it on and off, and of course the TCAS traffic, which is not working. The CCP menu. So this is what I was talking about before, where there's other menus are here in case of failure. So if you lost this CCP panel down here, it just stopped working, you could access all the features of this panel by clicking the CCP menu button. so you could still change things on the MFD. And the same thing down here as well. Where is it at? Yeah, okay. Lower menu, you see down here, left PFD menu. That would bring up this button, so you could change all of this stuff here over here if this panel failed. So there's lots of redundancy. It's pretty cool. Alright, the radar menu, not available yet. This is where you would change the tilt, or the you could turn the radar into an automatic mode or a manual mode. You could change the tilt angle and the gain and stuff like that, and also the ground clutter system, which the radar on the CJ4 is an amazing radar. When I was in training, some of the people there, the instructors, were saying that the CJ4 and the 777 had the best radar out there. And having flown it a lot, man, they weren't kidding. It's when you set it in the automatic mode, it does everything for you. It clears out ground clutter. You don't see anything but the cells on the Storm. And I think it goes out to 600 miles. It's a hell of a radar, and I miss it a lot. The rest menu is another shortcut where you can go ahead and set your V speeds. And also you can set, you know, if you want to do radar altimeter mins or barrow mins. However, this aircraft is not certified for Category 2 approaches. But it's there if you want it to be. But the TAWS menu is where you could inhibit like the train, the train inhibit. I'm sorry, what I'm trying to say here. How you can inhibit like glide slope or ground proximity warning system errors and things like that. If you're doing a gear up landing, it's going to constantly give you the, you know, landing gear. Well, this is where you could inhibit those things so they're not annoying you as you're trying to deal with an emergency. Alright, so that is the DCP panel. These engine fire buttons, so this is a guarded switch. If we had an engine fire, this would pop up and you'd hear this.
Left engine fire.
This would light up for the left engine fire, and if you were to click that button, it would close the shutoff valve for the left engine. I think it's the fuel and the hydraulic shutoff valve. And then you'd wait another 15 seconds to see if that extinguished the fire, and the light would go out if it did. But if it didn't, you would see this other button here would light up and say bottle armed in white for the fire bottle. So after 15 seconds, you would press the bottle, you would click that, and it would extinguish the fire bottle into the engine. You get a little ICAS message saying fire bottle extinguished A or whatever it is. And hopefully that puts out the fire, but that'll be there in the future. Alright, so the flight guidance panel. I can't remember what this one's called, to be honest, but it controls the autopilot, and up here is the reversion panel, which I think I did this. I've used this a couple of times. In fact, I had this panel go out on me. I was messing around with the weather, and I don't know what I did, but the thing froze and the screen just went blank. So maybe I hit a bug somewhere in the real software. But AHARS slaving, something you would never do. It's all automatic in the airplane. You'd only do this in some sort of crazy failure or something. But so these reversion buttons. So let's say you had your ADC, which is air data computer. I think there's 3 of them on this airplane. I have to look it up. But if you had a captain's ADC go out, you would lose air data on this side. So you would lose your altimeter, your airspeed, ground speed, true airspeed. If you click this ADC button, it's going to pull the information from the FO side, or I think the standby. I'm not sure which is which, because there's 3. There's one for the captain, one for the FO, and one for the standby. So switching that will give the autopilot the correct data, because it's not going to know what to do without air data computer. And so on and so forth for the AHARS, you know, your heading, information, attitude, what is it, attitude, heading, and reference system. PFD, you know, if this PFD were to go blank, you would click that button, and it would, I think it would populate it over here, or the necessary data. And there's different configurations. That's kind of a long-term thing, because I think failures for the jet, as far as realism, is kind of low on the wish list for simulators, because it's kind of annoying in my opinion, but it'll be on our list. And CDU is the, pretty much call it the FMS, but CDU, what is it, control display unit, something like that. So if one of these failed, you'd press that and it could revert it. What do we got? So we got the flight director. I don't think I had to go too much into this. Half bank. I think this changes to 12 or 15 degrees. I have to check that one. Get the back course for localizers. Autopilot transfer. Again, this is where you would actually doesn't even work, but this little arrow would indicate which side you want the autopilot to be syncing to for the AHRS and the ADC and all that. So if you've got an FO in that seat, you would go back and forth. Whoever's flying that day, you would have to do the autopilot transfer. So that's wait. I just noticed it's getting dark. So it's pretty much identical. Pretty much everything is the same on this side. And oh, it's froze. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the FMS. So this is the page you'd be greeted by when you start the airplane up. The status page. It's basically going to tell you the navigation database you have loaded in there. The one we had, I think it was like J7 World or Jefferson. And then it's going to show you the active database and the secondary database, because you could put two in there. So a situation would be if you were going on a 4-day trip and you have the database is about to expire in a day, you could upload the secondary database in there before you leave for the trip, and then on the day that it expires you could flip it over. However, right now these numbers are just calculated based on the time it's pulled from the sim, because we haven't really looked at ways of getting that information, because people use different databases. I think like Navigraph has different things like that. We'll possibly look at it in a way so you can know if your database is out of date. But right now it's just kind of filler information. If you were to go to page 2 in this one, it's just going to show the ident page, kind of what the airplane, what this FMS information is loaded from. You know, model, engines, and all that. You would never really even look at this page in real life. The next thing you would do would be to initialize the position of the aircraft, because the FMC doesn't know where it's at on the engine start, or on the when you first start it up. However, what it would show would be the FMS position here would fill in from the last known position that you shut the airplane off. But in the case of the sim right now, it always knows where it's at, because we haven't really simulated like, you know, GPS acquisition and all that. It's possible in the future, but if you were to load through the map in this game, it's going to fill in this airport because it knows where you're at. In fact, the real airplane would do that as well, because if you had actual GPS signal, it's going to go, oh, he's sitting at Denver, and it's going to put Denver in here and populate that in there. But this is not a field that you can put anything into. This field is, however, so if you wanted to initialize it through whatever, just put Denver in there. Oops, I don't know why it doesn't like Denver. You got to put it in twice. I have no idea why. Okay, I guess that doesn't work. Let's try Boston. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that, but imagine we're at Boston now. So it's going to give you the waypoints pulled from the database, or the Latin long. But also, how you would do it in the jet, you would just click this set position to GNSS, or what the GPS is reading. So you'd click this, it's going to throw it in the scratch pad, and then you'd set position, and you're good to go. Now that's it. Next you go to the flight plan, and you would put in your origin and destination. So in this case, I think I'm at Boston. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like Boston to me. Alright, so I think we're going to do a flight from Boston to Philadelphia. So we're going to enter Boston in there, and Philadelphia. It's going to calculate our straight line distance, 243, it looks about right. This route thing is like saved routes you have in the FMS. We don't have this activated yet. I don't think we have the alternate airport activated yet either. But you could put a flight number in here. I don't ever remember doing this in real life, because it's just, I don't know, we would just have our tail number in a separate location, I think. But alright, so this is where you'd put in your first fix, And the flight plan page, or the route page sometimes it's called, is the only place you can enter arrivals. I'm sorry, not arrivals. It's the only place you can enter airways in the Collins FMS. You can't do it on the legs page. So the flight plan page basically gives you just a very quick and dirty of what your route is, and then the legs page is going to show you every waypoint that's on the arrivals and airways and all that. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and load in our route, and I'm going to show you some of the ways you can load your routes in there. So in this case, we could just start with the departure. Since we're doing, I'll bring up on the screen here of the route I'm going to load in. So, departing Boston on the SOX 5 departure. And there's no transition here. I think there should be, but it's not coming up. There's some database issues here. We could execute this, but we don't really have to. But generally in real life, it's good practice to execute often, because if you were to put in the entire flight plan and then you get to the very last fix and you made an error and you cancel the modification, it's going to take everything away you just did. So it's a good idea to just execute every now and then to alleviate that. Alright, so we're doing the SOX 5 departure. Let's just say we're doing it off of runway 22 right. It's pretty close. So go ahead and execute that. Go ahead and check our flight plan page. So what this is showing, this is our first fix, and it's via the SOX 5 departure, and our fix is SOX. And then if you go to the next page, this is the start of fix 2. So in this case, our flight plan is going to Buzzard, and we're going to put it in the 2 box here, because the via is either going to be direct or it's going to show the airway. But in this case, our flight plan says we're going direct to Buzzard, so that's why it's going to say direct, because if you put anything in here with nothing in the via, it's going direct. We'll go and execute that. The next point is Sandy Point, which is a VOR. It's going to be in the 2 box. We're going direct. And this pops up as well. I don't know why there's different I don't know why there's 2 of them and why there's different coordinates. No idea. It's a database issue. So we're going to pick the first one, and then now we're going to execute. So this is where we're going to input an airway in there. So the entrance to the airway starts at Sandy Point, and now we're going to be via the airway. So it's, in this case, it's going to be Jet 121. We'll put that in the via box here. Now we need to tell it what point we want to exit the airway. And in this case, it's going to be Briggs. So put Briggs in there. It's going to figure it out. Alright, so we're going from Sandy Point, the Jet 121 airway, exiting at Briggs. We'll go ahead and execute that. Now, this is our route. The next thing would be the arrival, but let's just go ahead and look at the legs page so you can see the difference. So we're going to be the SOX 5 departure, going to SOX, direct to Buzzard, direct to Sandy Point, Jet 121 to Briggs, exiting the airway. So let's go ahead and look at the legs page. So this user waypoint shouldn't say user. It's kind of weird that Sobo is doing that. It should actually say vectors, I believe. I have to look it up though. Alright, so TJ. So this is all part of the departure procedure. TJ, Burrow, Buck, Jester, and SOX. So that's the end of our transition for the SOX 5 departure. Then we're going to be direct to Buzzard, Sandy Point, and remember this is where we started the airway. So it's going to be Sandy Point, and then the first fix on the Jet 121 airway is Hampton, and then the rest of these fixes, Plume, Manta, Drift, Briggs, and that's where we've exited the airway. So everything looks good here. Go back to the flight plan page, and now we want to put in our arrival. So our arrival into Philly, if we go to Depart Arrive, and click on Arrive, we're going to be doing the GIMS 3 arrival today. And our transition is Briggs. However, if we wanted to select a different transition, we'd have to deselect it. And it's going to have these other options, such as Dasha and Snow Hill. However, because our flight plan is Briggs, that's exactly what we're going to select. One thing I would recommend, too, is to not put an approach in until you know where you're going to go. It's kind of how you would do it in real life, unless you really know. but things can change all the time, and it's kind of annoying having to change your flight plan. And especially in the sim, sometimes it can get funky with putting the approaches in there. So I would just leave it out for now. You can always put it in later. I would put it in until you figure out, where the winds are coming from and what ATC is going to tell you, because sometimes in real life you might plan to do the ILS 9 left, but all of a sudden they switch the runways around. Now you're doing 9 right Victor, which is a converging approach. So it's kind of a pain in the ass. So I would just leave that out until you know what runway you're going to be doing. So let's go ahead and look at the legs page now. Let's see where we finished off. Brakes. Okay, so this is the where we exit the airway, and then we start the arrival, which is iRocket. Jim's, T. Luke's, cheese, steak, and then after steak is we get vectored for the approach, which again this should say vectors, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. Yeah, we'll fix that. Unfortunately, the flight plan page does not show our arrivals yet. We're working on that. But everything looks good in our flight plan. The next thing we want to do is initialize our performance. So we're going to click Perf in it. Now we've got the basic operating weight of the airplane, which is set at 10,280 pounds. Now, later on, we're going to be able to have this adjustable. You can change that if you want, because this includes the pilot and a few other things, such as like required documents and food and stuff and snacks. So that's the weight that we would use. However, we can set our cruising altitude. So in this case, we're going to go at 28,000 feet. And it's going to sense our fuel, which is, it's going to sense our fuel in there. So there's 2 ways you could do this. You could load it in manually. Let's say we've got 3 packs and 50 pounds of bags. You could load it in. It's going to recalculate the 0 fuel weight, and then it's going to add the 0 fuel weight plus the sense fuel, and that's our gross weight. However, there's another way to do it. If you want to do it yourself, you could calculate your 0 fuel weight and just throw that number in right here. It'll dash out all these values because it's irrelevant. So let's say in this case we have a 0 fuel of 11,566 pounds. Go ahead and throw it in there. Now it's going to take that 0 fuel weight plus the sense fuel and give us our gross weight and zero out all these values. And also, if there's a limitation, the max 0 fuel weight in this airplane is 12,500 pounds. So if we go over that weight, it's going to turn it yellow, meaning that there's an issue that you need to fix. Anytime you see yellow in the FMS, it means there's something wrong and you need to fix it. So let's just go ahead and put this to 11,000 pounds. Everything is good. We've got our gross weight there. We can click for takeoff. Now, takeoff, so it's going to tell us we're departing Boston, and it's going to give us our runway ID of 22 right. That looks good. Now this runway wind is not where you put the winds at. This is telling you the headwind and crossing components. You would actually put the winds in right here. There's actually a bug right now where normally if you had calm winds you wouldn't put anything in here. But we have an input check right now that's preventing that. But you could just put in zeros in there and it'd be okay. But this is where we're going to put our winds in. You can get your winds anywhere. You can talk to ADIS and get it. But in this case I'm just going to make something up. So winds are 250 at 17. Alright, 250 at 17 is going to give us a headwind component of 10 knots and a right crosswind of 13 knots. Actually, you can kind of cheat in the simulator with this one to figure out what the winds are. If you go to Index and Progress, page 2, it'll actually tell you what the winds are right here, because the way the simulator is just, we can just pull the value out of thin air from the sim, but that wouldn't show in the real airplane because we're not moving. But it's just a way to cheat, see what the winds are. Alright, so let's go back to the takeoff page. Next thing we want to do is put in our outside air temperature. You can get this value simply by reading the SAT, which is the static air temperature. So we'll go ahead and throw in 14. And our QNH, this right now only supports inches of mercury. We're going to change it so it'll support hectopascals. But for right now, you could type it in 2 ways. You could put the decimal in there if you wanted to. Or you can just type it without the decimal. It'll take both. The P altitude is your pressure altitude. which is the airport elevation, minus the difference from standard atmosphere, which is 2992. So in this case, the airplane is going to act like it's flying at 5 feet MSL. So imagine we're flying through a hurricane. Let's say the hurricane is 2835. It's a low pressure. That means that the airplane is actually going to perform like it's flying at 1600 feet. So it's going to perform a little bit less. So that does have a difference. And of course, if it's a really high pressure day, it's going to perform like it's flying in the negative, so performance will be better. It's going to show the runway length. I wouldn't trust these numbers right now. The database has some really weird values in there. Runway slopes are not in the game yet. If we pulled data for each of the runways, it shows the same elevation no matter what runway it is, so we can't calculate a slope, unfortunately. Wet and dry conditions, you can cycle this on and off. It doesn't really do much for the takeoff because you're not using any brakes, but there is a slight difference. But everything looks good here. Now this is good to go. We can go hit next. Now it's automatically calculated our performance data. You can turn anti-ice on or off. So anti-ice, if you had a flight taking off in icy conditions, it's going to pull hot air off the compressor. It's called bleed air. It's going to pull it off the engine and route that into the engine nacelles for heat, and also to the wings to heat up the wings to prevent ice buildup. So it's going to take off a little bit of performance from the engine. Might have to retweak some of these values, but for now I think they're pretty close. So it'll recalculate your takeoff length and all that. Takeoff flaps 15. You're almost always going to use flaps 15. The only time we'd use flaps 0 is if the airplane is hot. Oh, I'm sorry, if the airplane is heavy, you're flying somewhere hot and you're high elevation, because sometimes taking off flap 0 might give you a longer takeoff run and higher speeds, but you climb. Your second segment climb is better for obstacle clearance. So this depends on a lot of things, but honestly, flaps 15, 99% of the time. Alright, so these numbers here is our takeoff weight, and this is our gross weight minus 100 pounds of taxi fuel. This number, you should be able to change the default value for the fuel in the future. But for right now, it's just 100 pounds. So takeoff weight, and then our max takeoff weight of 17,110. There's a max ramp weight of 17,230, but don't really have that modeled right now. So if you had too many people on this thing, this value would turn yellow if you're above 17,110. And again, if it's yellow, that means you need to fix it. So next we have the takeoff field length, which is 1,800 feet, and that is the distance from the start of the takeoff roll until the aircraft reaches 35 feet above the runway. It's just the way they've calculated it, so it's not actually your ground roll. So 1,800 feet, this jet has pretty good pretty good takeoff performance, so it can really get up and go, especially if it's light. Alright, so now we've got our V speeds, V1, rotate, V2, and VT. Now VT is 140, and it's always 140. So VT is actually the single engine en route climb speed, and it's pretty much the acceleration speed. Once you accelerate, the acceleration altitude, which is 1,000 feet or so, you're going to climb at VT. So it's always 140, it never changes. Alright, so now we've got our V speeds. We want to go ahead and send them to the PFD so we can actually see them pop up. So when we send it, it's going to do a little dance here. It's in progress. Now they turn blue, we know they've been sent, and we go ahead and look. As you can see, the speeds are magenta now because they just got sent from the FMS, so we know that the computer calculated them. If we wanted to go in and change it ourselves, for whatever reason, which there really isn't any for the takeoff, those would turn blue, indicating that you set them. Alright, there's really not much you need to look on page 3. This would change in real life, but it's beyond the scope of the simulator. Alright, after the speeds have been set, that's pretty much it for the FMS as far as what you need to do for takeoff. It's pretty straightforward, it's very simple, but I'll go ahead and show you. Well, let's go ahead and go to the FMS and show you a couple more things. Alright, let's talk about the features of the FMS. First, we're going to start off on the index page as pretty much like the basic menu of the thing. MCDU menu. This is where you could Oops, actually it does that in real life. This is where you would start the, you could click data link here, or database update. This is where you would go to, actually update the navigation database and all that. So they're really not functional in the sim. You could click on the GPS position here, but really not, we'll show you that later. The data link, it is here, but we don't have it functional yet. In fact, the airplane that I flew never actually had data link. We never paid for it because the weather that we have, or the ADS-B in, allowed us to get the data from the FAA, so we never needed to query data link for getting weather and all that. But it'll be there in the future. We're actually going to look at, because it's much easier to implement this to get weather than the graphical weather menu, which I'll show you a picture of now. But yeah, that graphical weather thing was amazing, but that'd be in the future. The status page, we talked about that in the beginning. The position initialization. VOR DME control. This is where you could turn off your VORs and stuff in certain situations, or you can inhibit. You could put in certain VORs that you don't want the FMS to identify or use. GNSS control. This is one time you would use this. I think if you're doing VOR approaches, you have to turn off the GPS. I don't really know why. It's kind of weird, but it's one of the limitations on it. You would turn those off here, and it would show you the calculated RAIM and all that, but it's kind of outside the scope of the sim. We might put it in at one point. And of course, you could see the GPS status, how many satellites it's tracking and all that. All this good information is where you could find your current latitude and longitude. And of course, the RAIM limit and the probable error. These are just thrown in right now. It's not really calculating anything. It's not really in the sim, but the frequency page under construction. It's actually coming out in a little patch. I think there's hotfix coming up of 0.5.1. But here's where you could type in airports, and it would list you the frequencies that are in the database. Such as tower, the clearance, the approach, and all that. So that'll be coming up. The fix page is where you could throw in any sort of fix. Let's say you wanted to, I don't know, see how far away you are from, I don't know, anything at all. You could put that in there. It'll tell you the latitude you're going to cross it at, things like that. You can click a beam ref, which will put a point out there where you will pass a beam that point, which is basically directly off your wing. So it's certainly useful to have in certain situations. We'll put it in eventually. The hold page. This is rather complicated with the autopilot and the flight plan manager system right now, so this is kind of on hold, but this would be where if you had some sort of hold, you could adjust all this stuff. You click new hold, or actually when you click this button with the flight plan on, it's going to bring up the flight plan page of legs, and if you click one, it'll give you the option to hold over a current waypoint. And of course, it'll bring up published holds as well on charts. So this will be that'll get done in the future. Progress page. This is where you can see your current progress for the flight, and also the winds aloft and tailwind cross components, the static air temperature, and the ISA deviation. During the summer it might get pretty hot up there. You can kind of tell, like things like that. Cross track, how far off course you are, things like that. True airspeed. This progress page as well is pretty much the FMS text version up here. So normally when I was flying, I would have the legs page up, and then the FMS text here was almost always up. Just a nice quick glance to see how far away you are from the airport, and then the time to the next fix and all that. So that's usually how I flew the jet. Secondary flight plans not implemented, but if you had, I'm trying to think of a situation where you have a secondary flight plan, but I never used that function. FMS control. So right now the FMSs are independent, or when you start the airplane they're independent, but the sim doesn't really recognize they're always the same. If you notice, we're going to split this up, but it's going to cost a little performance, so we're kind of devising or trying to figure out ways to do that with minimal impact. But normally on startup you would go ahead and sync these things. That way if you make change to the flight plan on one side and you hit execute, this side sees the change as well. I really don't even know the situation why you would have them independent, but the option is there. Route menu. Never really used this, but you know, if you wanted to have a route you fly all the time, you could save it in here. And of course, right now we have the recall for the sim brief, things like that. But we don't really have this in there that much. The about page. Actually, these two things here aren't even in the real airplane. This is just, you can see the current version you're using for the mod. And this the mod setting here is the page we're going to put all the things that you that are just kind of difficult to control in the simulator. I think here, you know, turn the cabin lights on and off, which in the real airplane, the cabin lights actually can be controlled by the flight deck crew, which is up here. It's not really modeled well, but there's a little panel here. I'll show you a picture of it right now. But this is where you could turn on and off the lights, and you can actually turn on the coffee pot, things like that. But not modeled in the sim, so we're putting it right here. And also, I think we're going to put in like opening and closing the door, and maybe like turning on like audio for packs loading, things like that. So check back here for settings. And also, I think changing the units from like kilograms to pounds and things like that we'll have in here. So you can set that will be persistent as well, so you don't have to keep changing it every time. Database. So you can put in waypoints and get some information from it. So we'll put in Chicago. I don't know why it's taking so long. But you can put in airport and figure out, okay, I don't know what weird stuff going on, but figure out the longest runway, you know, the location, the name of the airport, and well, this will be updated in the future, but you can see what localizers are available and the runways and all that kind of stuff. DB disk ops, database disk ops, not something that's really in the sim. The defaults page. So this is where you could set certain things. It's not working right now, but these would be settings that would be persistent. So if you wanted to climb at a certain speed or cruise, you know, where they can. So when you put these values in there, the computer will be able to more accurately calculate, you know, your time and distance and things like that. Because it should be basing it off this and also off the conditions aloft. So it takes all that into effect. So there's certain things that this will go into: temperature compensation, automatic, this and that. So will be done in the future. Arrival data. So this, if you had flying into an airport and an approach selected, if you go to this page, it will show you the runway and like the length and the localizer frequency, so you can get that data, which is nice. And last but not least, temperature compensation. So in certain approaches in airports, if you're below a certain temperature, it's usually very cold, like, I don't know, minus 20, something like that. You have to compensate the altitude that you see in your window here, because, you know, as you get colder, the pressure level gets lower. So it's a dangerous situation where you might be lower than you think you are on an approach, which could lead to disaster. So this is the page where you do that. So it's kind of in the works, not really a big deal right now, so that's why it's kind of on the back burner. Alright, messages doesn't work right now, but this is where you look up any errors, any error messages come up on the FMS or data link messages. You could look at them there. This is the direct to page. It's one of the ways you could do it, but here it should show all the waypoints on your flight plan list. It currently doesn't show all of the arrival or the approach fixes. It only shows the initial approach fix. It's one of the limitations we're working with right now with the default flight plan manager, but we're working on it. I've got the tune page, so you would set up the radios. And the radios, you know, you can input frequencies various different ways. You don't have to put the decimal point in there or the 1 because it's redundant. So I'll give an example. Let's say we wanted to put in 125.35. You could put it in the long way, or you could just put it in 2535. That'll do the same thing as well. So that's really handy as well. So there's not really not much to talk about there. This page actually still needs to be adjusted. It's not quite right, but you could change your number here if you wanted to. And the TCAS modes don't work right now. this page as well doesn't quite work. That should be a diamond, but well, we're going to work on this. And of course, you could turn, you know, of what airplanes you want to see for TCAS. If you want to see airplanes above you or below you, things like that. We talked about the flight plan page earlier. Alright, so the legs page. So I'll show you a couple things here on the legs page. So this blue fix here is your from fix. In this situation, because we're on the ground, we haven't left anything yet, this is basically our fix that we're going to be coming from. And then our to fix is the one we're going to, is in magenta. So if you look on our flight plan, basically our first fix is user, and then it's going to be the runway is our departing point pretty much. However, once we get in the air and then we pass user, now this user waypoint will now become the from waypoint, and TJ will become the to waypoint. So there's a couple things you can do here. If you want to go direct to a waypoint, you could go through the direct page here. But since the legs page is almost always up when you're flying, it's nice and easy to just do it here. So imagine, you know, we take off, and ATC tells us proceed direct burrow. So you can click burrow. It's going to put it in the scratch pad. Drop it on the user waypoint here, which is the magenta line, which is our to waypoint. So you click that. Now it's going to sequence us direct to burrow, and then the rest of the waypoints. So just going to cancel that, but I could execute. Now, there is a difference though. You couldn't put in, if you put in burrow by itself and put it in here, it's not going to sequence the rest of the waypoints because you didn't select it from the key here. So in this situation, if I did direct burrow, it's just going to put it as a solo fix. So if you look, if we're going to be burrow and then user and then TJ and then burrow, so that's not what we want in this case. However, you know, a situation like that would be, let's say there was weather somewhere and ATC had you flying to some certain fix somewhere just by itself. You could put it in there. Or in this case, you know, you could do it anywhere. You could say, sometimes you might get a clearance from ATC that might say, you know, after TJ, fly to the Orman VOR and then direct burrow. So in this case, we want to go TJ, Orman, and then burrow. So we'll put this on top of burrow. Go and select the VOR. So now you see it's inputted, that's inserted that waypoint between burrow. So that's really nice to have. And you can also delete waypoints. So imagine air traffic control says after TJ proceed direct to Bucky or Buck, whatever that is. So we want to delete burrow. So we'll click clear. It's going to throw it in the scratch pad. Put it on top of the burrow line select key. It's going to delete that. So now we're TJ direct to Buck, and there we go. So that's one way of adjusting things on the legs page. Currently, this here would fill in with the speed and altitude crossing restriction constraints. However, that's not quite in our game yet. It's part of the VNAV features, which is very complicated. We're working on it, but most of this is not correct. Especially the database is weird on certain things, so that'll be in the future. But, we talked about the part arrive. The perf page, fuel management page. This is nice to see how far you can go. Actually, our time to reserve. So basically what this is saying is you can set your reserve fuel. So you want to land at 750, actually let's make it nice and simple. You want to land at 1,000 pounds of fuel. It's going to, it's not updating it, but it's going to figure out how long. So it's going to take this fuel number, which is our fuel on board, minus our reserve fuel, divided by our fuel flow in pounds per hour. It's going to tell you how long that's going to take. And if we were moving with a ground speed, it's going to tell you how far you can go until you hit that distance. So it's useful to know if once you're in cruise altitude, you know, let's say you have 1,000 miles to go in the trip and your range to reserve is below that, that's an indication that you're probably not going to make it unless you get a better altitude with a better ground speed or cut back in the throttles and go in like kind of like a long range cruise. And of course you get your specific range, which is the nautical miles you travel per 1 pound of fuel burned. It's kind of a meaningless number when you're flying, there's nothing you can really do with it, but it's there. And of course your ground speed will read out. Go to fuel management page 2. It's going to show you the counter of the total amount of fuel you've burned on the trip. You could reset this as well if you needed to. And then perf trip, we don't have it quite in there yet, but if you have all these values in there, it should tell you the amount of fuel is required for the trip and the amount of time it's going to take to get there. So we'll have that in there in the future. VNAV setup doesn't work yet because VNAV's not in, but this is where you would tell it the speed you would want it to fly and all that. The vertical path angle, I think it's vertical path angle. But, you know, we had no problem with 3 degrees, but if you wanted to do a 2.5 degree descent, something like that, you could throw this number in there, so every time it'll calculate, it'll try and fly a 2.5 degrees descent, if able. Let's see. Let's go back into the per page, the flight log. This is useful, so as soon as you take off, it's going to note the time that you took off, and then it's going to start counting how long you've been in flight. And then, of course, when you land, it's going to show you that. So this will be useful for logging block hours and things like that. There's a few things that don't work: the fuel used, the average to airspeed and ground speed, and these numbers here. Which, honestly, the air distance and ground distance you traveled is pretty much useless to you. But we'll get those figured out in the future. And the approach page is pretty much just the performance calculator for the landing page, which will show that later on in flight. The display menu, you can see the things that are grayed out are things that are not working yet. But however, the display menu is how you will show, you can show things up here on the map, which there's 2 ways of doing it. If you go to the lower menu, you can see this map symbols option here. Pretty much these things are what's going to show up once you click these buttons down here. There's a few that don't work, as you can see. They're just not in the game. These are the only ones that we've looked at that were default, so we'll get the other ones in there. But if you clicked on nav aids, it should show up certain nav aids and intersections, which these are out of control right now. There's a lot of them. Altitude constraints, I think that might be the best one right now, because it'll show you that you need to cross TJ at 420 feet and so on and so forth. So that's useful to have if you just want to see real quick, when you're flying on arrival, which altitude restrictions you need to pass, things like that. And of course airports, which I'm not really sure the logic Kosovo has for that, but that option's there. And of course in the future we'll have some of these as well. This one will be very nice. So the altitude select range, so when you're coming in on arrival and you have let's say 10,000 feet selected in there, there's going to be a little banana, sometimes called a range banana, that'll show up on your map of the where you're going to level off at that altitude at your current descent rate. So it's super handy to have. We'll have it in there eventually. The MFD Advanced button. So this is where you can cycle through your waypoints on the MFD map. And you can see it says Active Plan Map. So this feature requires the MFD to be in the plan mode. So if you go to lower menu, you go to plan here. Now we can cycle through our waypoints, which is nice and handy if you want to see what's going on. So pretty cool. And then the to waypoint here, it clicks to the current waypoint that you're flying to. So it's nice and handy to have that. There also is another option that's center waypoint. So you could center it on any waypoint in the database period, but we don't have that in there yet because it's a little more involved, and we'll get that in the future. MFD data is not working. That's how you could bring up certain pages on here for like takeoff and landing data and things like that, but we'll get that in the future. So that pretty much covers most of the FMS, I believe. So let's go ahead and meet you back again for starting on the checklist and getting this thing set up for flight. Alright, I forgot to talk about the MFD here and the CCP, so I think it's a good time now to talk about those features. So the upper menu here is controls this little block of information right here. So we've got the FMS text we talked about before, which is basically the progress page, just up here. This value down here, it's always going to show your destination. This should be the fuel that you should expect to have in the tank when you land, and then the gross weight of the airplane when you land. We'll be fixing those in the future. If you go to the checklist option, the checklist and the passenger brief can also be accessed down here. It's a lot quicker that way. And the systems is pretty much just the overlay here, which it's kind of handy to have, but I think we'd really only have this on during like engine start, and then you would have this in flight if you really needed to look at it. The engine page, it shouldn't do that. It should actually overtake this thing. So if I go ahead and turn this off, you see how the engine here is in the full mode. If you click engine, it should cycle it into the small mode and things like that. But as you can see here, when you turn that off, the map actually gets larger, which is what it's supposed to do. But normally when I fly, I have the FMS text. I had the FMS text up here. It's just super handy to have. And on takeoff, however, normally we'd have this off, so you want to see the full view of the engine here. Just because it just makes it a lot easier to see, and especially the temps and all that. In case you have any sort of issue, it's a lot easier to see. And then in flight, you could change that to whatever you want. The database button, if you click that, it's going to show you the database that you have loaded in the airplane. It's kind of in the works. You might do that. It's a little more involved. Nav data, if you press that, that's going to bring up things like the takeoff and landing pages as far as performance information, and a few more that we'll put in there eventually. The chart button, if you were to click that, gives you the option to bring up charts on the screen. That would use the little joystick here. This is actually what it's for, to pan across the charts and also the graphical weather page. The CAS page actually doesn't do anything in the normal configuration. What this does is if you were in an electrical emergency, this panel here becomes the only display, and everything gets scrunched into one. And if you have multiple messages on the CAS system, it actually spills over into a separate page. So if you click this, it's going to show the second page so you can see what's going on. So normally this doesn't do anything right now, which is correct. The lower menu, as you can see, we've pretty much filled in most of the rest of the options, but they're grayed out because they're not in yet, such as the present position and the graphical weather page, which is very nice. I'll show you what it looks like right here. That's definitely a lot more involved, but I would love to have it in there because it was very nice. The overlays, I can't remember what that is. I'll have to come back to that. The TFR test just does a little thing, and then the systems test, which is also what you would do at the beginning of every flight, or at least the beginning of the day of every flight. You would run through this here, which we will be having this in the future. This accompanies some audio for each thing, and also CAS messages and all that. So this is something you would test. Here's an example of some of the audio you would hear from that.
Left engine fire. Right engine fire. Forward baggage smoke. Aft baggage smoke. Landing gear. Landing gear. Cabin altitude.
Glide slope. Pull up. Terrain, terrain, pull up. TCAS system test, okay.
Alright, so next, we have the memory button. So these functions allow you to store the configuration of the MFD into these buttons, so you could easily come back to them instead of having to go to like lower menu and all that kind of stuff. It can be very annoying. So in this configuration is how I would have it normally. So I'm going to put this on memory 1. So when you click and hold it for 3 seconds, you're going to hear a little click again. That means it's been stored in there. It wouldn't really do that in the real airplane, but it's just an easy way to do it to tell you it's stored in there in the sim. Alright, now that's stored in there. So I'm going to set up for page 2, which I would normally have. Whoops, I did that backwards. I like having the rows or present position map on here, so we'll go ahead and save that to memory 1. Memory 2, I like having the plan page down there, so let's go ahead and select that. I like having the plan page, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw systems up there, so go ahead and that to mem2. And then memory 3, I always had the graphical weather map up here, but unfortunately you can't set that up right now, so we're just going to leave it like that. But, well, you know, for this situation, we'll go ahead and put on the terrain. I think that's terrain, right? There we go. We'll put the terrain up there for Mem 3. Go ahead and save that. Alright, perfect. So now we've set those up. If you go and cycle through them, you can see that all the configurations save. Super handy feature. Saves you a lot of time. Instead of fiddling with all these knobs and stuff like that. So that's kind of annoying. This little button here is where if you had a chart that sometimes the Jeppesen charts are on their side. So if you want to read it in the right side up, you can press this button, it'll flip it around. The zoom button only works for the charts and the graphical weather map, so you can zoom in. So this doesn't do anything with these setups here. Pretty much going over everything with that. So now I think we can actually start getting the airplane set up for taxi. We'll go through some of the checklists here. All these checklists that you see are actually, I pulled them from the real airplane and all that, and the AFM. So everything is realistic in here. So we'll go through some of these things. I think some people have some questions about them, like what certain things mean. So I'll just go over it. Some of the things don't apply into the sim yet because they're not implemented, but we'll just go over it and meet you there. Alright, so we're just about ready to taxi the airplane. So I'm just going to run through this checklist real quick. So our avionics switch is on. Climate control is going to be in the normal position. Yeah, I've turned the fans down so you don't really have to hear them or anything like that. Past our safety lights, we'll go ahead and throw this on. The safety lights pretty much illuminate, I think it's like a no smoking sign and the exit signs. So we would, when we were flying the airplane, we would turn those on pretty much every time we had the belt sign on as well. So we'll just go ahead and put them both on.
May I have your attention, please? At this time, please comply with the illuminated seatbelt.
Alright, so
no
we've got those lights on. The trims, you have the 3 trims right here. We'll just go ahead and make sure they're in the green. I think that this one's backwards right now. So I'm going nose up and that says nose down, but that'll be fixed in the future. So I'm going to put it right at the bottom there. Those look good as well. They're zeroed. Alright, flight controls, you would just, you know, kind of the whole check and everything, make sure you got nice and free movement. Can't really see much from the back, but make sure it's not stuck or anything like that. The speed brakes and ground spoilers, you would test this on the ground, you'd go all the way down. There should be a little message that pops up. You can also look out, you can see it on the wings here, make sure all the panels are up. And then you bring them back in, stow them. The flaps, we had a flaps 15 takeoff, so go ahead and set them now. And our flaps are 15, indicating 15. Looks good. Hydraulic pressure. Bring this little thing up. This actually should be 3,000. I think we talked about it before, but pressure looks good. Engine only anti-ice, not required. We are good with that. Takeoff data we have confirmed and set is set in there. Avionics, pretty much making sure, actually in this situation, it's going to set their altitude. I'm just going to put in 10,000. Jeez. And setting up the autopilot, you can do it on the ground now. It's not quite, there needs a lot of work with the autopilot and all that. But you can go and turn the flight director on. Normally this should be about 10 degrees up because when you change this pitch here, which is, these are the 2 default modes of the autopilot, roll mode and pitch. So roll mode is pretty much, easiest way to say it is just a wing leveler. And as soon as you turn on, it's going to follow whatever heading it was on and stay wings level. Pitch mode is adjusted by the vertical speed knob here. It should move the flight director up and down, but it doesn't. And oops, it doesn't move it, so it's kind of annoying, but you can set this up now. But that's generally how I would do it. You could set a vertical speed mode, things like that, but I think it's easier to hand fly it on the departure, get it to where you want, and then turn the autopilot on. Avionics are set. Got the pressure, I think that's good, there we go. Everything's good there. Autopilot, you would turn it on. It's on, you would turn it off. And it doesn't make that noise, it should make this noise to know everything's good to go. Now, some people I've noticed have used this button here. This is a forced disconnection. If you were to click that, Now it's in a down position. You can't turn the autopilot on or off because that is to make sure that it doesn't come back on again. So you'd have to click that off. Never use that in the real airplane. You would just turn the autopilot on and off with this button here, or the red disconnect on the yoke. So, alright, autopilot, this gauge disconnect, altimeters, we just checked it, pressurization. Again, there's really nothing you can do with this. You would normally see the pressurization readout down here. We'll get that in once we separate these displays. But you would just verify the landing or the takeoff field elevation and all that. And I think when you have the door closed, it pressurizes to like half a psi. There's some weird stuff that it does, but half a psi, because you shouldn't be able to open the door at that point. It'd be way too much pressure. The ICAS, pretty much make sure everything looks good, everything's in the green. Aft divider doors, again, like I was saying before, there's no door at all in the cockpit, but the aft divider doors are actually the lavatory doors back here. Those have to be opened for the emergency escape hatch in the airplane is actually right across in the lavatory. There's a little window. You pull these emergency handles and out pops this plug of a window, and you just throw it out onto the wing and you exit the aircraft there. So those must be open for takeoff in case you need to evacuate the aircraft quickly. So those look open. Latched open. Everything looks good. Alright, taxi. So we just got our clearance, whatever. Exterior lights, so I probably should have those on, but nav strobes are going to stay off. Go ahead and throw the taxi light on. And let's see, brakes, apply and hold. Yeah, you would normally just, the jet in the real world is going to start moving when you take your feet off the brakes. But in here we have it, it's going to be annoying in the sim, so I have it just enough thrust, so once you start it moving, it's going to kind of stay rolling, so you can just test the brakes. Alright, the brakes test good. Oh, release the parking brake, the brakes are checked. Nose wheel steering. The CJ4 uses pedals for this, there's no tiller, so looks like our steering works, that looks good. Flight instruments, you want to make sure everything looks normal, there's no red flags, there's no, you know, the altimeter is set. Just want to do a double check of that. So that looks good. Alright, before takeoff, so we're just going to go ahead and taxi to the runway. To speed you up, I'm just going to meet you out there. Alright, we're back. Just on the, oops. Would run this on the taxi out, but it's kind of annoying for me to run it. And then at a certain point, if it doesn't do it within a certain amount of time, you can increase it a little bit further, and it's got some time limit. And if that procedure failed, you couldn't take off in icing conditions because there's an issue somewhere that the engine nacelles or the wings are not heating up properly. The rudder bias system check, you would do this. So the rudder bias system is, I can show you a picture of the diagram right here, but it's a system where if you had an engine failure, the bleed air from the operating engine is going to push on by and you click it twice, because the first click is only going to have TA up there. Then the second click is going to also add the RA in there. So the reason why these would be separate is TA. Imagine if you had an engine failure, you are limited performance, so you're not going to be able to fly any resolution advisories if you have traffic. So what it's going to do is it's going to give the other airplane the procedure to fly and get out of your way, but for you, you're just going to get traffic alerts. So that's one reason why that would be TARA. But in this case, it's already set. Radar, you could turn it on now if you wanted to. You generally don't turn the radar on the ground because you can fry ground personnel. It's a lot of energy going out there. So if you wanted to take a peek at the weather as you're getting onto the runway, you could turn it on, but we're not going to use that right now. Go around button is right here on the side of the yoke. You'd press that, but it's not even enabled right now. We're trying to figure out a way to do that. But when you press that button, it's going to bring, or it's going to sequence for the takeoff pretty much. Battery amps are 20 amps or less. You can see that here, but as you notice, the amps are minus 500. I don't think the electrical system even works in the sim. We're going to fix that. But the reason you want it to be 20 or less is because of the regulation requirements for the, I think it's 30 minutes you have if you lost all electrical on the airplane. So you lost both generators. So you want that to be as fully charged as possible. In this case, 20 amps or less. Let me bring it back up. Let's keep going through this. All right, so amps are checked. Ice protection is required. We're not taking off in any icing conditions. And of course, we've just been cleared for takeoff, so we'll go ahead and throw the heats. Again, limited to 2 minutes. These always stay on from takeoff to touchdown. Exterior lights, oops. Exterior lights, we'll go ahead and turn on the landing light, strobes, logo, why not, whatever, I'll turn it off. And ICAS, checked, everything looks normal. Alright, so we'll go ahead and taxi onto the runway. Whoops, trying to break off. And this gives you just a, not really going to use this checklist, because you're just going to do this automatically. As we just described. So we're going to leave the extra takeoff up there. Oh, overshot a little bit. Let me just line it up. Alright, so I'm just going to stop here. It's normal procedure to sync the heading bug to the runway. So one reason for that is if you had an engine failure, you don't need to fiddle around with this heading bug. You're just going to follow the procedure. In most cases, your engine failure procedure is runway heading. And you can request that anyways from air traffic control. But actually, did that go away? Something funky going on there. But yeah, there should always be a heading bug there. But in this case, let's go ahead and sync it. I'm just going to engage lateral navigation. And we'll go ahead and start the takeoff roll. And things are going to happen very quickly, so. Alright. Airspeed's alive. It's 80 knots. E1 rotate. Come on now. Alright, 10 degrees, positive rate, gears coming up. V2 plus 10, flaps coming up. I'm going to go ahead and click to the climb detent. To do that, I'm just going to simulate maybe 93% power or something like that. I'm going to drop the nose, let it accelerate a little bit. And we have no course needle here, but it's just kind of annoying. But I'm going to go ahead and turn the autopilot on. That way it follows the course. Going to go to flight level change. Increase to increase 240 knots. There's that climb rate. Should just level off a little bit. Okay, looks pretty good. Climb speed's about right. There's still some adjustments to be made to the power. In fact, I think the drag of the airplane's a little bit too little, so there's some adjustments to that. Alright, so we are climbing out. It looks pretty good. It's actually a pretty realistic climb rate, especially at this speed, or this weight. This thing certainly climbs like a homesick angel, I'm telling you. Alright, so just going to have to take off real quick. Gears up, flaps are 0. Throttles are on the climb, detent. Yaw damper, oops, forgot about that. Yaw damper is on pretty much right up to takeoff, and it stays on until right before touchdown. The yaw damper is limitation, must be operable. I'm sorry, if the yaw damper does not work, you cannot go above 24,000 feet. And the reason for that is the airplane will Dutch roll if the yaw damper is not there. In fact, it does, because I did that in real life. I was doing a flight, forgot to turn it on. Captain didn't catch the on the checklist, and sure enough, I think around like 27 or 28,000 feet, the nose started to wander back and forth, and I had no idea what was going on, so I figured it out. As soon as I turned on the yaw damp, that went away. So it's generally, you don't, in a jet, you don't use the rudders at all in flight. It does everything for you, keeps everything lined up. The only time you'd use the rudder really is taxi, take off to stay in line with the runway, and when you're landing at the very last second, you're going to kick the rudders in to keep the airplane lined up on a crosswind, and that's pretty much it. Alright, so let's go run this real quick. Yaw damper, autopilot is on, ice protection, don't need it. Passenger lights, yeah, we'll turn it off. It's a biz jet. The executives are going to do whatever they want anyways, so. Landing lights, well, actually we'll keep the climb going. I think we're going to 28,000. Come on now. Bring the throttle back so I don't overspeed. Go to flight level change, 28 is set. Flight level change, bring it back. Alright, bring the power back up. And yes, if you don't, if you have a quick level off in this airplane, you better be Johnny on the spot in those throttles, because this thing will blow through 250 before you know it. Alright, that was a very aggressive climb there. It shouldn't do that, but we'll allow it for now. By pressurization, you would normally just check the cabin climb rate and all that. Not much we can do about it right now. And altimeters, set, cross-check. We're not through 18 yet, but we'll do that once we go through it. And it comes to the cruise checklist, so we'll do that when we need to. Now, I like turning off, I like having the black overlay here, because that's normally what you would see with the in the arc or the rose position. I don't really like having terrain up in this. I just like seeing my course and all that. In fact, I'll leave it up on there, just I think it looks cooler. Alright, everything looks good. Climbing pretty good. It's a little bit off. The airplane's pretty spot on. But, alright, so now we're just kind of in the boring part. So we'll just, we'll meet you back again when we get to something more interesting. About level off cruise, 27 or 28. One thing I wanted to note is the climb speeds. So you're going to climb at 240 knots until you intercept the transition, which occurs around 29,000 feet. Is when you're going to transition to Mach number. And the game is funky right now. If you notice, if you click this button here, where you change from indicated airspeed to Mach, it throws some weird number up here. I don't know what's going on with that. It was a bug introduced with the Sobo. But I wouldn't suggest flying in Mach. I would just fly in indicated hold or vertical speed. I'm sorry, flight level change in indicated mode or vertical speed, and then just match up the Mach number here, which the slowest you generally want to fly, or at least that we flew in real life, was Mach 6.4, all the way up to 45,000, because if you get too slow in the airplane, if you climb too slow, you get behind the power curve when you get at higher altitudes, and at certain points, especially when you get up above 40,000 feet, you'll just become too slow, and you cannot gain airspeed at all. You'll just be stuck, and it'll be at a high angle of attack, and it's not a position you want to be in at high altitude. In fact, the captain was telling me one time he was flying over the Rockies, and he hit mountain wave turbulence, and I think he was at 45,000. He hit mountain wave turbulence, and the airplane just got too slow, got behind the power curve, and he couldn't maintain speed or altitude. In fact, if he had the autopilot on, it's just going to fly, try to keep pitching up, and and trying to keep the altitude until it stalls. So the only way to fix that is to descend to pick up speed. So generally we always use Mach 0.64, as the lowest speed you want to go on the climb to ensure you never get into that bad position of being too slow at high altitude. Alright, so here we are. We're going to be pulling back the throttles a little bit. The other thing too you could do that, at least in the normal airplane, is when you climb, the FADEC has complete operation of the engine, and when you climb to higher altitude, it's going to increase the N1 because you lose thrust at altitude, but there's no FADEC right now, so you could just, as you get higher and higher, you could just bump up the throttles a little bit to account for that. In fact, probably once you get above 30,000, you could probably just go full throttle and keep that all the way up to cruise. Alright, so now, just bringing the throttle back, I think that's a pretty good speed. When I flew the jet, we flew around executives of the company, employees of the company, and the owners of the company, and you don't buy a jet to go slow, you buy a jet to go fast. So we would fly pretty much at the red tape right here. We'd fly at this speed everywhere we went. In fact, they did, because they can see up into the cockpit. There's no door. So when you're in a descent in the jet, you're pretty much almost at power to idle. And a couple of times they expressed concern because they saw that we were pulling the throttles back too much. But we had to tell them, like, hey, we can't go any faster than we are right now. We've got to bring the throttles back. So rich people love to go fast. Time is money. Time is everything to those guys. So we'd fly as fast as we could everywhere we went. But if you're doing those super long flights, you might want to throttle back just a little bit. In fact, the way you could kind of tell the most efficient is if you go to the, perf page, fuel management. This specific range is going to tell you about your efficiency, and it comes into play as far as fuel flow and the ground speed and all that. But if you had a nice tailwind, it's going to show you the nautical miles you're going to travel per pound of fuel burned. So this is the ultimate indication of the efficiency of the airplane. So if you want to go the furthest distance, this number here, you want this to be as large as you can. So find the highest altitude you can with the best winds, and just check that number. So, all right, so let's take a look at. Let's go to the legs page here, and we'll zoom out a little bit. All right, so it looks like air traffic control just gave us a clearance, so we're just going to fly direct to Hampton right now, cut the corner a little bit. So we're just going to click Hampton, drop it onto our 2 fix. So it looks like we're direct to Hampton now. Looks good. We'll go and execute. Now the sim does some funky stuff with drawing this line. We can't, sometimes it gets stuck on the screen. It doesn't really clear out the rest of the flight plan. Not much we can do right now until we work on completely stripping out the Asobo Flight Plan Manager and doing our own thing. So, alright, everything looks good. Guess we can run the cruise checklist. Not much really to cruise in this thing. Oh, there we go. Alright, so throttles are set, we're not overspeeding. Pressurization, not much to check, but of course, you just check the altitude. You would know if it went above 10,000 feet because you'd hear this.
Cabin altitude.
And when you hear that, you would reach back behind you, throw your mask on. If the airplane's in autopilot, it's going to go in an emergency descent mode, which is going to pitch the nose over, go as fast as it can down. So when you pass out at 45,000 feet, you'll wake up at 15,000 feet, wondering what the hell is going on. We'll implement that later, but that's what would happen. Alright, pressurization is good. Ice protection, don't need it. In fact, there is also a limitation of the tail de-ice, which doesn't even work right now, but you cannot use the tail de-ice if the outside air temperature is below -30. The reason being is because the tail has de-ice boots, which is rubber, and they inflate from the surface air of the bleed air system. And when it's that cold outside, you don't want to really exercise the boots because they can crack and get ruined. So they're just not needed. Especially, you don't really get ice below, 15°C maybe, or -15°C or -20. You generally don't get ice when it's that cold out, so it's not really much of a concern anyways. Alright, that's good. Next checklist, descent. Alright, so let's go ahead and pick up. Uh-oh. Are we on course? No, we're not. Why are we not on course? Love these limitations. Interesting. Alright, let's try to go to Hoffy. Alright, doesn't want to play nice today. Also want to talk about the PAX brief menu here. So I actually went back to the airplane and recorded this audio myself. Since we flew around a lot of executives for the company, we didn't really use this system that much because, you know, you're always flying around the same people. They've been on the airplane before. But for the people that we did fly, that was their first time flying, we would usually run the takeoff long because it's very long. It's a couple minutes long and it goes in roll. You know, it's pretty much the safety demonstration you would get flying an airline. But other than that, we would just maybe run the takeoff short or, you know, just turn the seatbelt signs on because they know when you're about to take off. But it's definitely cool to have. They can increase the margins a lot. But if you did fly this airplane under a charter certificate, I feel like you would do this a lot. But, you know, as a captain, you would also be talking to them as well directly. But I think it's pretty cool. All right, we're back again. We're going to start down. I'm going to put, I kind of missed it. I was kind of busy doing some other stuff, but I'm just going to cross Briggs. Oh, it's annoying. I'm going to cross Briggs at 14,000 feet. So, just do the quick mental math. It's 14,000 feet of altitude we need to lose. And if we want to go down at 3 degrees slope, we'll just do it at 3 miles. Oops. We'll just multiply that altitude by 3. And it's about 42 miles, so we're just shy of that. And if we want to find our required descent rate, we would multiply your ground speed by 5. So in that case, it's what, just over 2,000 feet a minute. So we've already missed our mark a bit. So I want to go down at 3,000, so we don't miss it. Again, bring the throttles back so we don't overspeed. And this is just a quick mental math you can do to find your descent, level off and all that. But in real life, you know, you'd have VNav to help you along. But if you just want to figure it out real quick, That generally helps. Let's go ahead and zoom in. So we can just double check. If we're coming up on 20 miles away on a 3-degree slope, it's about 300 feet per nautical mile. So we should be about 6,000 feet to go. So we should hopefully be crossing that at 20,000 feet. So we got 2 miles. So we go increase a little bit. Can throw the brakes out if we need to, but I think we're going to be okay. Not quite at idle yet. Everything's looking good. Maybe a little bit behind, but I think we'll be okay now. Yeah, VNav is going to be a big feature once it's in, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's kind of intertwined with a lot of systems. Oops, not maximized. And once we level off at Briggs, we're going to go ahead and get set up for the approach, get our landing speeds and all that. I don't really use the ATC in the game. I don't think it's really broken. But in the future, we're going to have it so the data link you can pull the weather information, so you're not restricted by the ATIS range or anything like that, which is how we would normally do it in the jet. You could just pull it up on the screen. But of course, you listen to the real radio too. But alright, so the altimeter at the field, it's 2992. Coming up on 4,000 feet to lose in 10 miles. Yeah, it's pretty close, about 12 miles, so it's close enough for the time being. You can also slow down too. If you decrease your ground speed, you'll decrease the necessary descent rate. But keep it a little bit in. And we'll maintain 290 knots. Alright, it's 15 or 14, starting to level off. Yeah, a little shy actually. I don't know what it's doing, to be honest. Can't trust these autopilots. I think the descent rate didn't like how fast it was going. Alright, so we're just going to let it do its thing here. Should start the turn shortly. Alright, there we go. Changed. iRocket. Okay, cool. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and set up our approach. So we can't get any numbers yet because we don't have any approach loaded in there. So just talk to approach on the ATC. They said to expect runway 27 left. Sorry, 27 right. And it's going to be off of Enzu. Yeah, we're going to throw the NSD straight in fix. So that looks good. Throw an Enzu. We'll execute that. And now we can go and get our performance information. So perf approach. Flying into Philly. Arriving 27 right. Winds 27010. I'm just going to make these up for now. Outside air temperature -12. That ain't right. On the field it's 14 degrees. And pressure is standard. It's a dry runway. So everything looks good. Pressure, altitude, runway length, that's, I think that's correct. Go to the next page. So we've got our VREF and our V approach speeds. And our landing weight is 13,317, which is below our max landing weight. So this would turn yellow if you're too heavy. burn some fuel. And our landing field length, 2,526 feet. The landing factor doesn't work yet. You would do this if you had any sort of like gear, or not gear, but like a flaps fail. If you had to land with flaps 0, you would run the checklist, and it might say, you know, in this configuration, multiply your landing field length by 1.67, things like that. But today we're not going to be doing anything like that. So we got our speeds. Go ahead and send them. It's going to tell us it's in progress. It'll turn blue. The speeds are in there. You just can't see them, but they're there. All right. So in this case, going to cross iRocket at 900,000. So we'll whoops, click vertical speed because the autopilot's really weird. Oh, got to dial this in first. Vertical speed down. Got 9 set. 20 miles away, we got to lose 5,000 feet. And let's go ahead and start slowing, 250 knots below 10, of course. No reason we can't level off earlier. Let's go ahead and slow early. And if you need a little help, you can always throw the brakes out, but this looks pretty good, this rate of deceleration. Alright, so I'm going to show you an example of what would normally happen in the real world. So you can see this arrival takes us around, and then you wind up kind of flying a downwind, and then you would get vectored off into the approach. But sometimes you get vectored earlier because you might come in and it's not a busy day, something like that. Alright, just turn to 50 knots. Keep that speed because that's what ATC is going to want us at. Alright, we're going to keep the descent going down to 6,000. And let's say they're going to take us to a heading, let me go ahead and sync that. Let's say ATC gave us fly heading 330, and then expect radar vectors to final. So we'll do that. There's 10,000. We can go and turn those on. I didn't even bother turning them off. Go ahead and throw this on there.
May I have your attention, please? At this time, please comply with the illuminated seatbelt and no smoking signs. Thank you.
Alright, so if you go ahead and look at the map here, Jiaotou is our final approach fix for 27, right? We've got Martin and then Enzu. So in the real airplane, what you do is you'd have the legs page up. You could go direct to Jiaotou, and then you'd have an option to set an intercept course, which will draw the line out straight from the runway and give you a course so you can fly inbound on that. However, in this case, we're just going to fly directly to Jiaotou and then intercept the localizer, because we're going to add that function later on as far as intercepting courses. So go ahead and select Jiaotou. We'll click the legs page to bring us back to the top. We'll go ahead and proceed direct to it. Alright, now we got our line direct to Jiaotou. It's already activated the approach for us. There's no exec because it's kind of funky the way we've got it doing now. But here we'll just go ahead and click nav. Let's see what it's going to do. It's kind of funky. Zoom in a little bit. This is what I was saying before, where it's not going to delete these lines. I don't really know why. It's kind of weird. Oh, busting speed limit. But it's going directly to Jiaotou. And just want to double check, but it should have auto-tuned our frequency. But if we want to check what the frequency is, we can go to the index page, next, and arrival data. So this shows us flying into Philadelphia. The ILS 27 right. Frequency is 108.95. So we can go and check our tune page. It already loaded us in 108.95. That is good to go. In fact, it's already showing us right here. It's kind of already got it set up there. So when we get a little closer, We're going to go ahead and switch to the nav mode, so we get the, it should say localizer 1 here, and then we can fly that in. I'm not sure where this is actually flying right now. Some funky stuff going on with this autopilot for sure. Let's try it here again. Right, let's go to Enzu instead. Let's see what that does. Oh my god. It's even worse. Who knows what this thing's doing, to be honest. But, let's see if that cleans anything up. Probably not. Oh yeah, it's all messed up. So we're just going to do it ourselves. Getting a little too slow as well. Can't trust this stuff. I'm not sure what it's doing. We're going to turn that off. It's going to hand fly it now. So in this case, since we're already in heading mode, we don't need to have this FMS up here. We can actually just go right to the localizer. And now it's got our localizer, and our course is already tuned and bound. It tells us the ILS 27 right of what it's identified what it is, and it gives us our DME readout. So in this case, we're just going to fly it just like this. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the chart. See, it's actually already showing us the glide slope, which I don't think it would do this. It's a little far outside the envelope right now. But we'll just go ahead and show what the procedure would be. Alright, let's see. The barrows for the ILS is 211, but we'll correct that to 220. I guess this should actually, I think it should show it up here in the PFD. It's not in yet, and it should also give you a minimums call out like this.
Minimums.
So, it's something we're going to do in the future. But looking at our chart here, we look pretty good. We're going directly to Jiaotou on this course. 5,000. Looks like we crossed Jiaotou at 2,100, so I'm going to put that in there. We've got 11 miles to Jiaotou. So we'll put 21 in there. I'm going to bring the power back. Let's do that. And generally, once you get into the terminal arrival area for an approach, at least in the citation, unless you're flying at a real busy airport, there's not much reason to really be above 200 knots. Especially if you're flying into some dinky airport, you know. But at least with these biz jets, you know, you're generally flying into airports that are small and just kind of serve the community. And oftentimes there's a lot of smaller aircraft out there flying. Most of the time they're not talking on the radio, or they might not even have a radio, like a Piper Cub. Which in that case, you don't really want to be screaming around the pattern at 250 knots. So generally, most of the time kept it below 200 knots. It's also less chance for the airplane getting ahead of you. This is the last place you want to be is behind the airplane on an approach, especially if it's in hard IMC conditions. So in this case today, normally you would, the approach would hold your hand all the way into this approach as far as speeds and all that. But we're just gonna, we have free range today. Just going to slow to 200 knots. Coming up to Jiaotou shortly. About 5 miles. 10 miles to the runway. I'm going to pop the brakes out. Slow me down a little bit. Zoom in on the map. What is this one? That's all we got. Now the speed limit for flaps 15 is 200 knots. Alright. Now once we get up... Oops. Here's 2,100 feet. That's annoying. Alright, we're back. That was kind of annoying. Turned it off. Alright, we're going to go ahead and throw flaps 15 out. Help us slow down a little more. Watch that pitch change. We should start seeing the localizer needle come in, which is right here. Getting blow mounted here. Going to keep 170 in. You can see the glide slope coming down. I'm going to go ahead and start the turn. Going to press approach. Blew over the needle a little bit. That's okay. We just captured the glide slope. As you can see, it's in red there, or it's in green, so we're going to go ahead and throw in the missed approach out to 3,000. Bring the throttle back. Going to stay on here. Going to throw the gear out. 200 knots limitation on the gear. Getting set up on the localizer now. Looking pretty good. I'm going to hold about 150 now. Dropped a little bit. Got the runway in sight. I'm go ahead and pop up. And we're off. I'm gonna fix that. Once we get a little bit slower, the point where you want to put flaps 35 out, because they put out a lot of drag, is pretty much once the landing is assured. It depends though. If you're flying at visual conditions like this, you can put it down on short final. It's not a big deal. However, if you're flying a hard IFR approach, all the way down to minimums, it sometimes helps to get stabilized at the final approach fix. So you'll be landing configuration, gear down, flaps 35 out there. That way the approach is nice and stable all the way down. But in this case, we're just going to wait a little bit longer. There's really no rush. Nice conditions. There's the loc. Just going to get in a little bit high. I'm going to start bringing the power back. I'm going to slow to approach.
500.
I'm going to drop the flaps. That'll help us slow down. Sim is very pitch sensitive. Alright, comes approach. Bring the power in just a little low. And then I'm going to slow down to VREF, pretty much right over the threshold. And then you want to flare just enough to stop the rate of descent. Don't do any more because you'll float. Alright, throttle's out. Oops, not yet. There we go. Get the nose down. Start the brakes. Bring the throttles out. Apply the brakes. There you go. Bring the speed brakes up. Turn these off. Don't need them anymore. 2 minutes, remember. Don't burn them up. And that's pretty much it. We'll get off here. And head into the FBO and head out in the town for a nice steak dinner. Hope you enjoyed everything. Kind of hip pocket class. It's a lot to cover, and there's definitely a lot of things changing on the jet, so I'm probably going to have to revise this video in the future once we add some more capability to the aircraft. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of how to fly the thing, and we'll see you again in future updates.